Wouldn't have been here at the time of the battle, but from the Evergreen Cemetery, which you can start seeing some of coming up here on your left. Keep in mind, this area would have been much more wide and open, with only around 400 graves and a lot less in the way of trees and landscaping. Hancock has an equestrian statue that's over here to your right. He's seemingly every place on all 3 days of the battle. The only woman statue on the battlefield, Elizabeth Thorne, who along with her father will bury over 90 Union soldiers while she's 6 months pregnant. There's her statue to the left. This is the famous gatehouse. There were a lot of photographs taken of that after the battle with broken windows. And one more equestrian on East Cemetery Hill, and that will be one for General Howard, the Union 11th Corps commander, who's looking more towards the July 1st battlefield north and west of the town. As we drive a bit through the town to get out to the first day, I'll point out a few buildings along the way that have some significance, including the site of the only civilian death, which will take place in the small brick house to your right. 20-year-old Jenny Wade baking bread for her sister. A bullet is fired from the town, which will go through a door on this left-hand side of the building, strike her in the back, and she's dead. Somewhat amazing, I think, that there was only one civilian death, because you're talking about 7 million bullets and 60,000 artillery shells fired during the 3 days of the battle. Coming up here on your right, you're going to see a couple of large sycamore trees. Why do I mention them at all? They were here at the time of the battle. They're considered witness trees. And if you get a chance, look to your left behind these two pine trees, and you'll see a brick building. Those white pockmarks are bullet holes. So you can feature in that upstairs attic window being fired at by Union soldiers up on Cemetery Hill. So we just drove between the skirmish lines of what become those fish-shaped lines for July 2nd and 3rd. Buildings in the town that were here usually have small bronze plaques on there. You can see quite a few of them both left and right of us here. Civil War building, July 1863. About 250 of the original 400. This gray building coming up here on your right would be the house that Jenny Wade is born in. Many of these used as hospitals after the battle, including a Presbyterian church that you'll see coming up here on your right. And that's also going to be the church that President Eisenhower attended when he was living in Gettysburg in the 1950s and 60s. Population of the town then, something over 2,400 people. Today the borough has about 8,000. It was and still is the county seat of Adams County. Look to your left, you can see the old courthouse building with clocks facing north, south, east, and west. That's the old courthouse building. Also, Gettysburg had two colleges back then. Oldest, Lutheran Theological Seminary, dating to 1826. Seminary Ridge, named for it. And the second one, a prep school for the seminary, then known as Pennsylvania College, now known as Gettysburg College. Nicknamed their athletic teams, the Bullets. One of their professors, Michael Jacobs, gives us the weather report for the battle. High of 78 on the 1st, 85 on the 2nd, and 87 on July 3rd. As is typically in the summertime. High humidity, but no shorts and short sleeve shirts. Uniforms made of wool, jackets and pants, long sleeve shirts, long one-piece underwear, and the average march getting here, coming up from Virginia, 15 miles a day. Now as we enter the center square, glance to your right, you see a 3-story dark red brick building. That's the David Wills house. That's the building where Lincoln spends the night of November 18th. His bedroom would have been on the 2nd floor, second window to the right. That's where he finishes off the Gettysburg Address. It was not written on the back of an envelope as he got here. It actually went through 5 very careful edits, the last one being right over there. Now, transitioning to the battle. It takes place the first 3 days of July, 1863, which are going to place Gettysburg pretty much in the middle of the Civil War, which begins with the firing on Fort Sumter, Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, April of 1861, and won't wind up ending until April, May of 1865 with the surrender of the various Confederate armies. 2 armies engaged. Union Army, called the Army of the Potomac. If you've never seen a photograph of George Meade, there is one on the side of your map that has the 3 miniature maps. Meade is 47 in that photograph. That shows you what hard campaigning will do for you. And the Army of the Potomac is going to have around 90,000 men. The Confederate Army, led by a much more famous individual, I think most of you have seen Robert E. Lee. He leads the Army of Northern Virginia. They're going to have about 75,000 men, although keep in mind, neither side will fully concentrate here until late in the day on July 2nd. Now, perhaps some of you are wondering why both armies wind up here in south central Pennsylvania. They had been in Virginia prior to this. Well, after the Battle of Chancellorsville, early May of 1863, the Confederates decided to bring the war north. They had at least 4 reasons for wanting to do so. Number 1, get both armies out of the state of Virginia, which had been heavily fought over the prior 2 years, so that their farmers could grow crops. They knew if they left, the Union Army would pursue them. Secondly, looking for supplies. Not much left in Virginia, so as they come north, through Maryland and then Pennsylvania, they're gathering huge quantities of supplies, usually paying for it with Confederate currency or IOUs. They'll do this very successfully. During a 5-week-long campaign, Confederates gather enough supplies to extend the life of the Army of Northern Virginia by 3 to 6 months. Third reason, trying to relieve the pressure on Vicksburg, which is located in Mississippi. Who's there? Ulysses Grant. That doesn't work particularly well because Vicksburg falls the Union forces on July 4th, making it a really bad week for the Confederate States of America, as they're going to lose 2 major battles in the course of 48 hours. And the last reason was a belief on the part of the Confederate High Command that if they could win another battle in the East after a string of victories, that one more decisive victory might lead to negotiations which would include Confederate independence. So it's possible that the Confederates win this battle, we wind up becoming permanently 2 countries. Now, as we go over this ridge line in front of us, folks, which will be a part of Seminary Ridge, we'll be on the July 1st battlefield, north and west of the town of Gettysburg. And you'll be looking at now a part of the 6,000 acres, 9.5 square miles of terrain controlled by the National Park Service. You will see from time to time some historic structures, like the stone part of the McPherson barn, dating to 1820. Reconstructed fence lines where farmers would have had them to mark boundaries to keep their livestock in, other livestock out. Artillery pieces, of which about 3/4 of the tubes are original, and a lot of monuments. You saw a fair number of them already in East Cemetery Hill. There are over 1,300 monuments here. Largest number of these, Union. Reason, they won. History 10's written by the victors. Secondarily, Pennsylvania is a Union state, and lastly, most of these monuments go up for 30 years between 1880 and 1910. Back then, former Confederate states, not a lot of money to spend on things like monuments, a fair amount of hard feelings involved, so they're encouraged to place monuments here. Most of them wind up becoming state monuments, of which we'll see a number later along the southern end of Seminary Ridge. Now back to the main thread of the story. Confederates are going to get the jump on the Union Army coming out of Virginia. So by the 3rd week of June, they are going to be pretty much completely within Pennsylvania, but spread out over quite a wide area. Look to your left, that'd be west. Between Cashtown, 8 miles away, and Chambersburg, 25 miles away, that's where 2/3 of the Confederate Army is going to be. There's also going to be a large Confederate presence almost 40 miles north of us, right outside of the state capital of Harrisburg. Give them one more day, and they would have temporarily captured Harrisburg. And lastly, Confederates will be as far to the east as the Susquehanna River. They get as far as Wrightsville in York County. So what happens on June 28th is that Lee finds out from a spy the position of the Union Army, something he'd not known for several days. He's told that it's north of Frederick, Maryland, south of us, and it's heading in this direction. Now Lee becomes alarmed because his army is spread out in 3 different directions. He's afraid that it might be able to be defeated piece by piece. So what he'll do is to issue orders to concentrate the Army of Northern Virginia, what he's going to call the Gettysburg Cashtown area. So this battle is unplanned. It's frequently referenced as a meeting engagement. It occurs here for 3 reasons. Number 1, the 2 armies are getting close. Secondly, it's those 10 roads that I mentioned earlier that act as magnets in bringing the 2 armies here. And thirdly, the Union Army decides to contest the Confederate advance with the first shot being fired out along the Chambersburg Road at about 7:30 in the morning. Second monument on your right, 6th New York Cavalry, goes up for $8,500 in 1890, struck by lightning. Park Service paid over $100,000 to put it back in the shape it's now in. As we pass it by, also look at the bronze relief, which shows these men, at least according to them, in a cavalry charge. Now Buford's men fight on July 1st, off their horses, dismounted. So they're portraying themselves in a more glorious manner. Or as one visitor told me a number of years ago, and I've stolen his line when he said, the older we got, the better we were. That's a fish story. They did have cavalry charges someplace, but it wasn't here at Gettysburg. In the distance, if you look long enough at its top, I think you will see the flickering flame of the Eternal Peace Light Memorial. Dedicated in 1938, 75th anniversary of the battle, last major reunion of Civil War soldiers. On that field to the left of the monument, there are 1,800 veterans here. Average age, 94. One man claimed to be 112. Listening to a speech given by President Franklin Roosevelt. The monument, made of Maine granite on its base, Alabama limestone on the shaft, so it's also supposed to symbolize the reunification of the North and the South. Anyone think of another monument in the United States that has an eternal flame on it? Kennedy's grave in Arlington, and there's a connection between the two. Because he, Jackie, and Caroline, in late March of 1963, it was actually an Easter Sunday, are given a tour of the battlefield. After he's assassinated, Jackie remembers that he admired this monument. So you have one of President Johnson's aides called the park to find out what an eternal flame is, and that's the reason there's one is grave in Arlington, because the visit Dad had here the previous spring. It's lit by natural gas, which is provided free of charge by the Columbia Gas Works. That's sort of their present to the park. And it does occasionally go out, very high thunderstorms or very heavy winds. I'm looking around and I don't see much rain on the windshield here. Think we should get out? Yeah. Okay, let's do it then. Okay? If it gets too bad, we can always get back in the bus, okay?